I think God might be real, just not in the way you think. By Weather's Writing, Part 2. First of all, I want to thank everyone for their kind words and support from the last post. A lot's happened since then, and a bunch of context is needed, so I hope you'll bear with me as I explain the details. Back during the peak blinking crisis, I remember having a lot of difficulty sleeping. It was common for me to average only 4 or 5 hours a night, and the little sleep I did get was marred by terrible nightmares. One in particular recurred many times. I was only 8, but somehow I was in the driver's seat of our family's old SUV. My arms were long enough to steady the wheel, but my legs didn't quite reach the pedals. It didn't matter, though, since the car seemed content to continue at a constant pace. I looked over and saw my mom in the passenger seat. Her face was a blurry likeness pieced together from the dozens or so pictures I'd seen of her over the years. I tried to bring her into focus, not only because I missed her dearly, but because she was speaking, pleading even. She waved frantically at me, and then brought her leg up and slammed it down on the floor mat several times. I didn't understand what had her so upset until she pointed out the front windshield, and I saw we were hurtling directly towards a giant tree that had fallen in the middle of the road. Panicking, I stomped for the brake, but my seatbelt protested and pulled me back like an invigorated dog on a short leash. I sat up and tried clicking it off, but I wouldn't budge. My breaths became hollow cries, and I felt my heart beat against the bars of its bony prison. I grabbed the steering wheel, I pulled it to the left, and then to the right, attempting to swerve off the road. But it was as if whatever kind of glue was locking up the seatbelt was also fixing the steering wheel in place. "Mom, what do I do?" I yelled, tears streaming from my eyes. She was yelling back at me, but it was as if there was a divider between us. Neither of us could hear each other. I turned back just in time to see the giant oak tree meet the front bumper, and then I jolted awake with a piercing pain in my chest that radiated up through my throat in the form of a giant scream. My little legs kicked under the covers and tears rained down on my pillow until my dad ran in and knelt at my bed. "Lauren, are you okay? Did you have a bad dream?" I grabbed my pillow and hugged it so my face was covered, and then effused in a long wheeze while rocking to the other side. "Oh, honey," he soothed and brushed my hair. Then the tears from my face when I would allow it. Time would pass in silence, and when I began to get the sense that my dad was ready to leave, I'd chirp out, "Stay?" in that way children do when they're embarrassed about wanting something. "Always," my dad would reply, and then he'd post up on the floor with my large tomato plushie as a pillow. One night in particular, it was deep in the night. I had awoken to a tapping sound outside my window. I was so afraid that a monster had snuck into my room while I wasn't looking that I made him stay next to me and face outward. I'd peek my eyes open every minute or so to check to make sure that my dad was there, staking out the room. Eventually, he rolled in close and said something that I still remember to this day. "Hey, baby, guess what?" he whispered. I mumbled. "I think you scared the monster away." I tried to picture this through the fog of my fatigue. Something seemed off about the statement, like it wasn't logically possible. But before I could piece together the words to express that, my dad cut back in. "I was scared because I realized you're a superhero. You know what your greatest superpower is?" I shook my head, making sure to rub my forehead against his shoulder so he could sense it in the dark room. "Your greatest power is that you get to tell the monsters what to do. Because the monsters are only as strong as the stories you tell about them. And there's all kinds of stories. There's happy ones, there's sad ones, scary ones. Tell me, this monster you think snuck in, would you say he's part of a scary story?" "I don't know," I said, confused. "Maybe." He hummed, contemplating. "Well, I want you to remember this. You have the ability to tell any kind of story you want to. Maybe there are monsters, but that means there's heroes and angels too, right?" I was beginning to doze off to the comforting sound of my dad's deep voice, but I gave another affirmative. "So, if you're ever scared, honey, just dream up a better story. A story that will bring you peace. You understand?" I was already out. I woke up the next morning to the feeling that someone was in the hotel room with me. The drapes were drawn, and the only sound was the AC unit blowing cold air. But when I looked towards the dark corner of the room at the empty coat rack, my mind conjured the face of my dad, smiling at me, chanting that same awful line. "Oh, Lauren, you know who we are." I was no longer a child, but it took a couple of minutes of cold focus before I muscled the courage to ascend from the safety of my covers and flick on the lamplight. The small amber radius extended to where my dad's feet would have been if he'd been standing there. But there was no one. I let out a sigh and collapsed back onto the mattress, thinking back on all those years growing up. The same man who had helped me conquer my fear of the dark was now the monster hiding in its shadow. I looked over my shoulder, and I saw the clock read 10:15. My meeting with Trent was in 3 hours. I moaned and stretched my arms and back until they knocked against the headboard. Then I collapsed back onto the mattress, meditating, gathering energy like a compressed spring. All at once, I jumped up and glided over to the drapes, opened them in a single fluid motion. I grimaced at the sunlight, but the warmth felt good against my face. I stopped by the nightstand and gulped down the final few swigs of a bottle of mellow yellow that I had purchased from the vending machine the previous night, then undressed and hopped in the shower. The warm water wasn't enough to wash away the previous night's memories. When I closed my eyes to lather my hair, I was back in my living room, standing opposite the demon that had taken on my dad's form. His smile, his laugh, it was like someone in my head was flipping a switch between the man I loved growing up and a terrible monster. But the fear was more powerful. I heard something drop onto the tile floor on the other side of the curtain. The noise made me gasp and open my eyes while shampoo was still streaming down my face. I swiped the shampoo out of my now burning eyes and squinted into the curtain, trying to see through it, but I couldn't make anything out. Is anyone? I started, trembling, afraid to finish the sentence. I reached out and pinched the end of the curtain. My heart was in overdrive. I swallowed, and then pulled it towards me and peeked out. I scanned the room, but I couldn't see anything out of place. It wasn't until after I finished showering and wound myself up in one of the hotel's 2 small towels that I saw what had made the noise. I bent down and picked up the stub of a razor blade that had fallen onto the tile right next to the puffy gray shower rug. It wasn't mine. I was pretty sure hotels don't keep unguarded razor blades just laying around. When I held it up, it occurred to me that if it had simply fallen a few inches to the left, it would have been buried in the rug, and perhaps I would have stepped on it. I stared at myself in the steely reflection, cold, lonely, small. What if I was all I was able to think before the blade blinked out of my hand? I threw on some clothes, packed up a few belongings I had into my purse, then checked out of my room. I didn't feel safe going back home after what happened, but I also didn't want to go anywhere else. I got in the car and drove aimlessly up and down the town streets, focusing only on the car ahead of me. Anytime I started to travel down an avenue of thought, I'd make a turn or speed up, hit the brakes, anything to keep my mind distracted. It was sweltering outside, but I'd turn the heat on for a minute at a time until I felt drenched, then toggle max AC until I was cool, and then back to the heat. I repeated the basic driving tenet, 10 and 2, 10 and 2, 10 and 2, like a mantra, a chant to focus my attention on a single point. And then I pictured that point disappearing. I began to think that maybe I wanted to disappear. I fully intended to keep going that way until 1 o'clock, but after about 30 minutes, my meandering route had led me to St. Mark's Catholic Church, where a large group of people were gathered around a long line of tables in front of the building. I slowed down. At the front of the venue was a large, white cardboard sign which read, "Plant a seed, share the joy." I wasn't sure what that meant, but my boredom had come to a head. I rationalized that if there was any place on God's green earth that would be safe, it was this one. I parked along the closest side street, then walked over to the church. Rows of white tables were covered with cardboard boxes filled with small plants that were wrapped in individual paper pots. I watched from a distance as people behind the tables carefully removed the plants, one by one, and offered them to passers-by. I continued down the line, a sheep in the herd, and allowed myself to sink into childhood memories. I had somehow made it out the other end near the narthex when I heard a woman's voice call to me. "Hey, dearie, have you gotten one yet?" I turned and saw a small, gray-haired lady with rose-colored glasses. "Oh, no," I started, attempting to decline, then paused. The old lady grabbed one of the plants and held it out for me. "Here," she said. "Come on, I won't bite." "As far as you know," I thought, then stumbled forward with a sigh. "Thanks," I sighed and took the plant. "What is this all for, anyway?" "Well, it's a giveaway," the old woman responded. "Staff have been growing these plants, tomatoes and garlic mainly, so they could offer them to members of the parish. The idea is to have the members grow the produce, and then donate it to St. Mark's Food Pantry to give it to those in need." "Oh, that's actually pretty cool," I replied and inspected my plant, which was at present nothing more than a small green stem. "So, which kind is this one?" "Oh, that one is..." The old lady stopped and inspected the other plants near where she had grabbed mine. "Tomato." "Tomato," I repeated. "Well, thanks again." "Of course, dear," the old lady beamed. "We're all responsible for each other." I nodded, and then continued back through the crowd towards my car. When through the large vestibule windows, I saw a priest speaking to a young couple. It had been a little over a decade since I had attended a service. I stopped going during high school when I started studying for other religions, and I didn't recognize this priest. He was short, just over 5 feet tall, bald, African-American. He wore the customary black robe and white collar, and there was something in his smile and the way he seemed to be affirming the couple that made me yearn to speak with him. I considered for a moment, a bit embarrassed to be stepping back into the church after all this time, but the thought of being able to burn 10 minutes talking with someone who might have some insight into my situation was too tempting to pass up. I waited near a portrait of Mary Magdalene, my tomato plant in hand, staring off at the pristine series of stained glass images portraying the death and resurrection of Jesus. About a minute in, the priest met my eyes. He smiled, his way of telling me he knew I was waiting, then finished up with the couple and made his way over. He had a bit of an accent when he spoke. It was Ugandan, from the best I could tell. "Hello, miss. I don't believe I've had the pleasure," he said, and held out his hand. He leaned in as he spoke, and his smile tugged at the corner of his eyes, which were already marked with use. I shook his hand and returned what I'm sure was a weak smile. "No, I don't think so. My name's Lauren. I used to come here when I was little. It's been a while." "Well, you picked a good day to visit, if you're into gardening, that is," he remarked with a laugh and gestured towards the plant. "It's nice to meet you, Lauren. My name is Martin, or Father Martin, if you prefer." "Father Martin," I repeated. "I have a friend named Martin. It's a good name." He laughed and said, "Thank you. I'll pass that one along to my mother. She loves the praise." I laughed back. He carried himself in such a carefree way that I was put immediately at ease, almost to the point where I forgot what I wanted to talk to him about. I started, attempting to word my question in a way that didn't sound like I needed psychiatric help. "I have a couple of religious questions for you, if you have time." "That is what I am for. Ask away." "They're about miracles, like the ones in the Bible. I was wondering, do you think that miracles still happen today?" "Miracles? You mean like water into wine?" "Kind of, yeah." He contemplated. "Well, I haven't seen them myself. You know, I may be a priest, but I also have a degree in physics. I think that God made the world according to laws, right? But I do think God has the power to intervene. Yes, I've just never seen it. Like, you know, the biblical type of miracles. To me, there are miracles happening all around us. Miracles we can't see." "Exactly," I responded, thinking about how no one else could see the blinks. "Those kind of miracles. What are those miracles we can't see?" One of Father Martin's eyebrows raised, and he rubbed his chin. Well, I think one of the greatest miracles is the miracle of God's love, which was perfected in Christ and offered to each of us. It's his power to heal even the most troubled mind. By coming into alignment with God's will for us, we can see the true purpose of this existence. No, he's not getting it, I thought. I scrambled to my other entry point. What about the story of Job? God made a bet with the devil that Job would stay faithful to him no matter what the devil did to him. Do you think that kind of situation is possible? Father Martin's expression drooped into a concerned frown. There's quite a difference between miracles and the story of Job. I suppose I see what you're getting at, though. Job's suffering is in some way the antithesis to positive miracles. In this life, we are tested, sometimes to the point of losing everything. But even that person who has more reason to hate God than anyone else can once again find peace and eternal happiness through faith. In fact, it is often the person who is lowest in the pit of suffering that needs the light of Christ more than anyone else. I thought back on the first night that I prayed. It was in my moment of greatest helplessness that I reached out to God, and I thought I had found my answer in him. But now, after what happened last night, after all these years of chaos, not merely losing things that were important to me, but my very sanity, I needed more than just blind faith. I couldn't just sit idly by and hope things would get better. I smiled at the priest and said, "Thank you, Father. This has been very insightful." "Of course, sister. I'm sorry if I couldn't have been more help." "No, I think I understand now. I've been wrestling with something, and I think God wants me to confront it. I think I've been running away and hiding from it for so long that I'd convinced myself it disappeared." Father Martin nodded in understanding. "Well, in that case, will you let me leave you with a prayer?" I was a bit taken off guard by the request, but I accepted. "Sure, Father." I watched as he made the sign of the cross, and then he lifted his hands and closed his eyes. Dear God, I am so happy that I had the privilege of meeting with Lauren today, especially on a day such as this where we are offering gifts to those who need them. You have heard her desire to confront the things that are troubling her. I ask that you bless her with strength and peace and a clear conscience, that she may overcome these challenges. God, bless us with your Spirit, that we may see your hand in our lives. Amen. Amen, I said. As I was leaving, Father Martin called out to me and said, "Oh, just so you know, this Friday at 7 we are having a barbecue at the parish center. I would love to see you there, if you are able and wanting." Turning back, I smiled and said, "Oh, okay. Thanks, Father. I'll think about it." The priest nodded, and with a smile, he sent me off. I walked into the deli at 1 o'clock on the dot. The customers who had arrived for the lunch rush were already cleaning up their trash and heading out. I dodged past a few of them on my way down the long, narrow path leading to the front counter. After I waited behind a couple of elderly folk who were picking which soup they wanted to pair with their ultimate grilled cheese, I looked around for Trent. He hadn't sent me a picture or any way of contacting him throughout the day, so I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I figured I'd see some man half hidden behind a newspaper scouting me out. Maybe I watched too many movies, I thought. "Ma'am, you're up," croaked the teenager behind the register. "Oh, right, sorry," I replied, and stepped up to the counter. I muttered, scanning the menu for something that looked edible. "Could I just get—" I made sure to mouth every syllable as they were words of their own. "We have a deal. The try-two combo. Sandwich and a soup for $9.99. The cashier repeated for what was probably the 50th time that day. Yes, that sounds good. I'll do the Italian sandwich and a potato soup. And a drink, please." After I paid for the food, I wandered around the tables, hoping to find someone who looked like a Trent. I was picturing a short guy, runner's build, with long brown hair, tucked somewhere neatly away in the corner. So I was not prepared when the Hulk's stunt double growled my name from a table smack dab in the middle of the restaurant. "Lauren." He had a pale, square face that was spotted with freckles and a sinking property that came with the lethal combination of stress and age. His hair was relatively short. Probably it was brown auburn, but since it was slicked back, it looked almost black. And he wore what looked like janitor coveralls. There was even a cloth tag pinned to his chest which read, Trent. Lauren. He repeated. Yes, that's me, I said, and took a seat across from him. When I saw a brown tray on the table in front of him, and on the tray was a large, white soup bowl. It was empty and beginning to crust along the edges. You must have been here for some time already. I didn't know where you'd be, so I was worried we might have missed each other. I'm glad you found me, though, I said, while looking over Trent more thoroughly. His large hands were stretched out in front of him on the table. He wasn't wearing a ring, so he probably wasn't married. And his face, it was stern. He seemed like a no-bullshit kind of guy. And I saw his eyes. They were sapphire blue. Probably the most stunning I'd ever seen. We only spoke on the internet, so I hope you don't mind, but I usually run a preliminary test on anyone I meet who claims to have abilities such as yours, Trent said, while reaching into his pocket and removing a device that had the size and shape of an electric razor. All you have to do is look into it. It takes maybe 5 seconds, 10 at most. Sure, I said reluctantly. Do I just... I asked while reaching for the device. Trent clicked the button and released a cylindrical head which opened, revealing a glass circle about the size of an iris. I'll hold it. You just look into the center. A red cross should appear. Then it'll take a picture. Okay, I replied, and I did as he instructed, leaning my head forward to look into the device. Sure enough, the red cross appeared. Is it... was all I got before the light turned blue, and I saw a gray fog disperse and billow throughout the inside of the tube, extending for what I perceived to be miles. My jaw went slack and I couldn't breathe for maybe 5 seconds. Then Trent reshuttered the device and turned it over. Damn, 72, he said with a hint of shock. That's the highest I've scanned to date. He looked back at me, more relaxed now, and muttered to himself, How have you been able to function for this long, at this level? You should basically be half in, half out. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a mixture of pain and frustration and fatigue and impatience, which all poured out at once. Listen, Trent, I said as sternly as I could. I came here because you said you knew what was wrong with me and that you could help me. I get that you have to make sure I am who I said I am, but now it's your turn to pay up. How do I know you know anything about my condition? You said my mom might still be alive. What does that even mean? I saw her die right in front of me. I want answers. I waited for Trent to respond, but he only lifted his head. I turned around and saw a girl holding a tray of food. Hi, sorry to interrupt. I have an order 36 for Lauren. Oh, yes, thank you, I said. The worker placed the tray down on the table in front of me, and when I saw the food, I suddenly realized how hungry I was. Trent must have also realized this because he folded his arms and said, Go ahead and eat. I'll explain while you do. I wanted to protest, but my salivating mouth made other plans. Fine, I said. I grabbed the metal spoon off of the tray and started on the soup, bracing against the steaming heat of the potato chunks. As I ate, Trent moved all the items on his tray off to the side, and then he flipped the tray over so it raised slightly off the table. He took his cup and placed it face down on the center, and then he rolled up a few of his used blue mayonnaise packets and charted a track across the tray. What are you doing? I croaked out between bites. Trent ignored me and continued by ripping up a napkin into strips and placing them alongside the mayonnaise packets. Finally, he snapped 10 toothpicks in half and stuck them into the tomb of a dozen overlaid napkins. It's a diorama, he said at last. It's my what? From the story you sent me, your diorama. When I read about it, it gave me a good idea of how to explain the blinking. I pointed at the cup in the center. Is that supposed to be a pyramid? Because I'm pretty sure you're in the wrong geometric neighborhood with that one. It's an analogy, he said. Of an analogy, I quipped back. Look, he picked out one of the toothpicks and held it out in front of me. This could be a person, an animal, a crowbar, whatever you want. The point is, this diorama is a stand-in for our universe. This is everything that exists, what we can see, okay? Okay. Now, me. Trent placed a hand over his heart. I am not in the diorama. I do not exist in the universe. In the universe where a cup is a pyramid or the actual universe? I said, unable to control myself. Trent grimaced. Sorry, keep going. I get it. Things pop into. Trent threw the toothpick back onto the tray, or out of, and he picked the toothpick back up, of our universe, at will, based on forces. He patted his chest again. That exist in other realms. He gestured to the room. That are connected to our universe. He tapped 2 fingers against the tray. These things could be objects, like, say, a toothpick, or entities, like the one you encountered yesterday. The blinking experience that you described aligns with the typical experience of a modern antenna. That's what I call people like us, antennas, because we can pick up on the signals others can't. We? You mean you see the blinking too? Yes, but not to the same extent as you. If all the blinks are gathered in a giant picture that you can see, I'm traversing the image through the binoculars, maybe even a microscope, depending on where we are. I thought about this. I guess it was possible that there were other people like me out there. But since I'd never met anyone, I didn't really consider the idea until now. And then for him to say my ability was somehow much stronger than his. But, I started, I haven't even seen that many blinks since I was a child. It's just more focused and malicious now. Yeah, Trent scratched his head. That's the thing that got me really interested in you. Somehow, you seem to be able to control it without gear, just by praying. And look, that's all well and good, but I don't want to give you the false impression that I'm some kind of religious leader. I like to look for logical, scientific explanations for things. So that's the frame I'm coming at this from. I took a sip of my drink. That's fine, I said. The truth is that's why I reached out to you in the first place. I wanted an explanation I could understand. An explanation that was directly related to what I'm going through. I was scooping out the last potato that was stubbornly gliding along the bottom of the bowl when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the old man from the line shooting up from his bench and standing in army erect form. I felt a tingling sensation tickle the back of my neck. I didn't want to turn towards him. I knew what I'd see if I did. Trent, I whispered, trying to tip him off. He grunted, and then when he saw my expression, he snuck his right hand under the table and said, Do you see it? Is it here? I cocked my head to the left, signaling towards the old man that was now facing us, but Trent didn't seem to notice him. His eyes kept scanning the entire front of the restaurant. Then I saw the old man take a step in our direction. Lauren. Oh, Lauren. I've been looking for you, Lauren. The old man said in a low, gravelly voice that gave the impression he was gargling liquid tar. I turned and saw his face, and it was cold and expressionless, and a butter knife was poking out of his left fist. When I met his eyes, he smiled that horrible smile. You're a slippery little bitch. You know that. He spat. Why can't you just stay put? Don't you get tired of running from your old friend? Or have you forgotten about me? Trent, I mumbled out. Right there. And this guy, you think he can help you? He's only here to help himself. If that's not clear, you really are a lost little lamb. Give me your hand, Trent instructed. I was silent, my eyes still pinned on the old man. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The demon-possessed senior wagged his finger at me, taking a step, and then another step. shortening the distance as much as he could while I was entranced. Then, suddenly, he sprinted forward at a speed that shouldn't have been even possible for a man his age.
"Trent!"
I screamed.
"Lauren, give me your hand!"
I spun around and grabbed Trent's outstretched arm, just as the old man lifted the butter knife over his head like a pickaxe. Then I saw Trent pull out what looked like an old toy gun from under the table and point it at the demon.
"Gotcha,"
Trent remarked. I braced for a gunshot, but there was no noise. After a couple seconds, I looked back and saw the old man was sitting at the booth opposite his wife, his hand tremoring as he reached for the large drink. "What did you?" I asked, but Trent was already pulling me out of my seat.
"Come on, we have to go," he said. "The effect is temporary. He'll be..."
But before he could get out the last word, I saw the cup pyramid on Trent's tray blink out of existence. The sound of a plate shattering rang out from the table up ahead. The lone woman standing there slowly turned around, smiling, with a fork in one hand and a piece of the broken plate in another. Trent shot her with the toy gun as we ran past, and then barreled through the front door. "Where are we going?" I asked between gasps.
"My van. It's loaded with kit."
"And then where?"
"Your house,"
replied Trent, who stashed his gun back in his pocket and then took out a key fob. "My house? But that's where it appeared."
"Yeah, and that's where you banished it."
Trent waved me into the passenger seat of his Ram 3500 ProMaster. I noticed right away that the dash looked more like it belonged in a new limited edition EV than a cargo van. The ignition kicked on automatically, and I heard the beep of a sonar ping precede an English woman's voice calling out like some oxed-in GPS saying, "Scanning for anomalies." Trent shifted the van into gear, and I heard the wheels sputter as we accelerated backwards and whipped out of the small parking lot.
"What's your address?"
Trent asked. I gave it to him, and then speaking to his dash, he said,
"Car, take us to..."
"Address." "Redirecting to..." "Address," replied the British woman. "Currently detecting 31 novel emergencies. Updating pings every 300 milliseconds.
The van has sensor equipment which can detect blinks. It's much more accurate than either of us."
"And it sees 31?
"Yes. That's not as many as it sounds,"
Trent said, and tore past a car that blinked out of existence right as we turned onto the main street. We drove on for another couple minutes, the English woman updating the number of novel emergencies every 10 seconds or so. Her constant babbling eventually became a comforting background noise, and I was able to think again. "In the message you sent me, you said my mom might still be alive." I looked at Trent to see if he would react to me bringing her up, but he remained stolid. "What did you mean by that?" Trent thumbed his steering wheel. "I shouldn't have sent that," he said at last. "Shouldn't have? What do you mean? You can't just say that now." Trent took one hand off the wheel and turned towards me.
"Look, we're going back to your house because we need to determine your origin point. All antennas have them. It's a place of high energy where many realms intersect. Kind of like a station. It's a place where you first acquired your abilities. Based on everything you wrote, I'm guessing that place is in the forest where the accident happened when you were a young child. But I need to confirm it. Once I can confirm that's the place..." Trent hesitated. "Then... what? You want us to go back there? To the place where my mom died? Or at least where I think she died until you told me she might be alive, but now we're taking it back? That place?" "It's the only way to..."
"Now detecting novel agent," the English woman interrupted. We both perked up as she gave another update. "Net anomalies, 437. Novel agents, 1. Chance of contact, 78%.
"Shit," Trent muttered. "Car, course correct."
"Attempting course correct to avoid collision. Attempts made, 10, 50, 75, 79. No alternate route detected. Chance of contact, 96%.
"Time until contact?"
"Time until contact, 13 seconds." I shuddered. Looking out the front windshield, I saw cars pop out of existence left and right, opening up a clear path to the four-way intersection ahead. In a blink, the streetlights all turned green, and then they vanished completely. It was as if the entire world was being stripped down bare, and all that remained was the road
boxed in by rows of buildings along either side. In the distance, I could see a large tanker barreling towards us.
Trent.
I know, he replied, and clicked a different button on the console which opened a new toggle for the shifter labeled TD. He pushed the stick forward, engaging a new mode, and then pressed the accelerator all the way down to the ground. You're gonna want to hold on. What are you doing? I yelled, grabbing onto my seatbelt. No time to explain. Car, release phase lock.
Phase lock released.
I watched in horror as the color drained from the road, the buildings, the sky, transforming it all into a dim tunnel, with only the headlights of the oncoming semi-truck visible up ahead. I had the sudden thought that this was all a dream, just like the ones from my childhood. I looked over and no longer saw Trent, but my mother. And then I realized this wasn't a dream. This was hell. I was being forced to relive the worst moment of my life, over and over again. Just when I thought I had escaped, I was pulled right back into that car, helpless as we approached, but never arrived at our impending fate. I closed my eyes, right as the lights engulfed the windshield, and braced for the usual pain in my chest, for the feeling of braking. But it didn't come. Shift was the last word out of Trent's mouth, and then I was infused with the sensation of being at the pinnacle of a roller coaster. I was suspended there for what felt like hours, but somehow I knew that not even a second had passed. Everything inside the van, the dashboard, windows, ceiling, doors, even Trent himself began to radiate enigmatic particles. They were a mass of constant motion, like raindrops falling through the air but never landing. I looked down at my hand, but it was gone, diffused into an unknowable number of untraceable particles. The world outside, once devoid of color, was now nothing but color. When I tried to focus on a particular spot in the infinite geometric folds of whatever realm we were traversing through, I could sometimes detect a trace of our world. The old lady from the church, she appeared as if through a window, standing behind a table, holding out a plant. Only this image was much brighter, and the plant she was holding was pure gold. Then I'd catch a glimpse of the razor blade. It was large, many hundreds of times larger than the van, and surrounded by darkness. These ghastly images appeared like holograms or reflections that caught the light at just the right angle, and then dissipated. I stayed there, looping between the archetypes of my life for a long, long time. I knew we were returning when I felt the first sense of motion. Breath filled my lungs for the first time in what felt like a day. I blinked, and then we were back in town, driving down the same road with the blue sky above. People were jogging on the sidewalk, past the little street shops. The street lights were active. I checked the side mirror and saw the tanker had just passed by. I looked over at Trent, who met my eyes. We shared a look of knowing and unknowing. For some reason, that was enough. We continued on in silence. We agreed to stay the night at my house. Trent had parked a couple blocks away in front of a couple vacant houses, so as to not arouse suspicion from the neighbors. Then he lugged a large duffel bag with his equipment in and set up in the living room. He scanned the scrapbook, which contained the newspaper clippings from the accident several times, and confirmed that it was likely my origin point. I simply nodded, and then went back onto the back porch. I sat there for hours, basking in the sun. Something had changed in the past day, but I couldn't pick out what it was. Too much had happened, too little time to process any of it. When the sun set, I went inside and Trent told me about his plans for the next couple of days. He said he needed to run a few errands in the morning, and then meet up with a couple of his associates. After that, we could begin our drive to southern Illinois. He said it was likely that the entity that was chasing me had first tied itself to me during my childhood accident. For whatever reason, we came into contact, and now it didn't want to leave. Trent would help me get rid of it. He didn't go into many details regarding how that was going to happen. But I don't think in my tired state I would have been able to understand much anyway. He had a plan. That was enough for me. At least for a while. After our meeting, I made sure that Trent had enough pillows and blankets like a proper host, and then I retired to my room. I laid down on my twin bed and stared up at the cream-colored ceiling. Then I turned and saw the participation awards for my junior soccer league stashed in my dresser. I pictured myself on the field, running with the ball, out ahead of everyone except the goalie. I took a shot, but it was blocked. Then I ran back to defend. How can such a simple game be so much fun? Was the last thought I had before drifting off to sleep. I woke up only once during the night. It was still dark out. The room was warm despite the small, flower petal fan churning away, shifting the hot, humid air from one pocket of the room to the next. I waited in apprehension, sensing that something had disturbed me. I saw the tomato plushie peeking out at me from the slightly ajar closet door where I had stashed it so many years ago. I felt like I was missing something important. Then I heard it. There was a tapping at my window.